Ben 10 Alien Force is viewed as the peak of Ben 10. Its first 2 seasons gave audience a rich story arc with many well fleshed out characters and quality action scenes. The choice to age up the show alongside the audience, giving people a mature and serious take on Ben 10, attracted a lot of good reception. While the 3rd season ended up being a bit of a step down from the others, some fans have begun to warm up to it over the years. To most, Ben 10 Alien Force is a near perfect entry into the franchise. But as you can imagine, the ideas for a sequel series probably didn't come easy when you have to make one for one of the most beloved cartoons on the network. In the process of developing a show, especially one as big as a sequel to, like I said, one of the most popular cartoons, you're bound to probably scrap and change a lot of ideas throughout the development of said show. Which is why if you're a diehard Ben 10 fan, you have definitely seen this image probably more than once. This image is an official piece of concept art showcasing the original look for Ben 10 Alien Force. This and many other pieces of concept art for Alien Force all give off a pretty different vibe from what we ended up getting in the official show. From significant changes to the main trio's character designs and a lot of Ben's aliens looking extremely different, along with having to shift the show's intended tone to fit Cartoon Network's wishes. The original Ben 10 series was a smash hit, so it's no shocker that Cartoon Network immediately greenlit and started developing a sequel.
Instead of bringing back Man of Action, as they were busy working on Generator X at the time, Cartoon Network opted on bringing in producer and director Glenn Murakami, most well known for his work on The Batman, Teen Titans, and several DCAU shows. Murakami would go on to ask Dwayne McDuffie, best known for creating our childhood with his work on several DC cartoons and his involvement with Milestone Comics. The pair began working on the show, coming up with their ideas for the project while also having to take certain studio ideas and mandates into account.
The studio made it clear that they wanted Ben to be older this time around, the reasoning behind it being so that they could reinvent and rebrand the series to keep interest in the franchise, which was told to us by Men of Action.
Rebranding is what they call it, where you keep, same thing, keep the pieces but put some new cool on top of it, is really a studio decision. So we would have kept young Ben young a bit longer, but that wasn't our call to make.
The Wayne article also said aging up Ben was the studio's idea, as well as the idea of having Kevin join the team, which was something the crew ended up liking as well. Now we're going to look at early drafts for Alien Force that were given to us back in August when the Dwayne McDuffie website launched. The first thing you'll notice is that the series was initially called Hero Generation, which then switched to Alien Force. For the most part, most of the plot remains the same going into Alien Force's pilot episode, as the first draft of Hero Generation is pretty much one-to-one with the first 2 episodes of Alien Force. Grandpa Mask goes missing, Ben's encounter with the DNA alien in the rust bucket, Ben going to get the Omnitrix out of his closet, and everything else is all detailed in the Hero Generation series Bible. But this draft did include some information about the season 2 finale, showing us that the vision for the show was clear and mapped out even on day 1 of production. There are some details in the Hero Generation Bible that never made it into Alien Force proper, like the idea of Gwen's magic being the cause of the Omnitrix malfunction in the classic, or giving us insight on why Ben took off the Omnitrix, as in the draft it says that he learned to take it off after successfully beating Vilgax, instead of leaving everything vague like the show does. You can also spot a few smaller changes, like the plumber's helpers and other characters who were all seemingly meant to be half human, half alien heroes, being referred to as Ben's 10s. The DNA aliens and hybrids also had their name switch going into Alien Force, as in the draft, DNA aliens were called hybrids, with no mention of the xenocytes, and the hybrid were called the DNA aliens. The hyperspace jump gate also had a name change in the draft, as it was called the Matter Transmission Receiving Station, which is definitely a mouthful. Going through the bios for some of Ben's aliens, Swampfire was described to have flammable methane gas burning through a hole in his chest, which is something you can see on his concept designs but not in his official. Goop was originally going to have the ability to mimic shapes of simple objects, but we never see this in the show either. Alien X's debut was originally going to have him destroy a mountain range, causing Ben to be scared of using Alien X entirely, instead of how it played out in the show, where he rewound the broken dam, and Ben only refused to use Alien X because of the bickering caused by Bellicus and Serena. Echo, Jet Ray, and Chromostone all had different names during the development of Alien Force. Echo was originally called Echo, Jet Ray was called Blue Streak, and Chromostone was simply called Shard.
Other than name changes and small details that were never touched on, the main plot didn't go through any real changes. What was changed, though, was the show's overall tone, as there are lines in this draft and interviews from Dan Reba and Glenn Murakami that heavily express their want for Alien Force to have a drastically different tone. The crew originally wanted Alien Force to be creepier, similar to the X-Files, Scooby-Doo, or retroactively Stranger Things, rather than the traditional superhero tone it ended up falling into. Page 2 of the draft reads, Ben 10 Hero Generation is X-Files, not X-Men. This is Scooby-Doo, but the monsters are real. Dan Reba, who did storyboard work on Classic and was a director for both UAF and the OV era, spoke about wanting to keep the direction of Alien Force's pilot episode in an interview he did with the Watchtower database.
That we tried to tell you, that was what we were trying to do. And they're like, oh, it's so dark, it's so scary. If you look at that first pilot of the first episode of Alien Force and how creepy and scary and, oh my gosh, it's terrifying. And it's like, yeah, that's it. That's what we want.
They were taking his vertebrae out and putting them in a tray.
It's like horror, man. It's love horror.
Night. Why does everything have to be at night? So, yeah, you blame that on Cartoon Network because we would have had a cooler show.
Glenn Murakami shared similar sentiments in an interview, saying how they wanted Alien Force to be more of a mystery show than a superhero show.
I wanted it to have a different tone. I didn't want it like... I want everything with Ben 10 to be about the big city, and I didn't want it to be all about like video games and stuff like that. But it was supposed to be more finding aliens is scary. It was supposed to be a little bit more of a mystery show, and I think they wanted it to maybe be a little poppier.
Right.
But to me, I'm like, it didn't make sense to me that Ben was a superhero.
Personally, I do think a darker and creepier interpretation of the Ben 10 franchise could work. Even Ben 10 Classic never really shied away from the creepiness and absurdity of the alien worlds out there in the galaxy. And while it's easy to take the extreme approach when saying we would like darker and more mature storylines, I feel like something closer to the MCU would be a perfect balance, being able to take realistic stakes, emotion, and more layered storylines while still being able to be marketed and enjoyed by younger audiences. While Ben 10 at its heart is always better as a family-friendly show than a show strictly geared towards mature audiences, more mature tones, themes, and a creepier overall setting would still blend nicely into the Ben 10 universe.
Cartoon Network wanted the show to be a more traditional superhero show. It's not only affected the show's original tone for a story, but also the look for many of Ben's aliens. Network wanted the aliens to have more stereotypical superhero and humanoid-like builds, which resulted in pretty much all the aliens going through an overhaul of changes.
Comic book illustrator and storyboard artist Eric Canetti made concept designs for all the aliens in the show. Tom Perkins, Glenn Murakami, and Glenn Wong also made concepts alongside Canetti. Going through them one by one, you can really see how much they wanted to take a horror approach with the show when looking at the aliens. Perkins' take on Swampfire is still within the line of the classic series art style and method of design. Ultimately, I do think they made the right decision with his final design, as he's easily become one of the most iconic looks and transformations in the whole Ben 10 franchise. It's very interesting to see these different interpretations of how he can go. I'm especially a fan of the awkward head shapes and the gill-like shapes in his neck, and especially Perkins' signature awkward proportions and angles. Glenn Wong's more tree-like appearance for Swampfire is also an interesting take, but for me, lacks the personality in his face that really makes the final design charming, though I am a fan of the red center. And Murakami's, closest to the final Swampfire design, also has an interesting take with a primarily black, sleek body surrounded by vines. Eric has the most different interpretation of Swampfire, with more mammal and somewhat amphibious-like traits. While it does make him look more like a living being rather than a tree come to life, it doesn't exactly invoke swamp fire to me, perhaps due to the lack of red and orange in the design. Echo didn't change much outside of his concepts, but it did look like he had an additional power of extending parts of his body through the cord-like appendages protruding from his head, which would flow throughout his limbs. He also had much more circular eyes and overall body shapes, but similar to Swampfire, I do think the final design trumps all.
Spider Monkey's design kept the same philosophy, having the monkey-type body with the spider features. Two of his concept designs, though, give him more bug-like eyes, while the other gives him more spider-like face. All the designs, though, change up his proportions, stripe patterns, look of his tail, and the placements of his limbs.
Big Chill has some pretty large changes to him, with the wings having different strings and patterns coming off of it, and experimenting with different ways for the wings to coil around his body like a robe. One design features purple, rubbery-like hands and feet, while others emphasize his insect-like nature a little bit more. His final design is a more simplified and harmonized blend of all of his previous attempts, and like Swampfire and Echo, I do think you just can't beat the final designs.
The original designs for Alien X gave his body a blue tint instead of being full-on black. The majority of his changes, though, came in the head designs. The first set of head designs seemed to take heavy heavy inspiration from the Greek god Janus, with the faces on both sides of the head and having them float. I'm sure these were thought of as a way to represent Alien X having two personalities. The other set of head designs are more in line with the official look, but they vary in their head crown designs. I really do like the 5th crown design with the horns and the flaming headpiece in the center.
So far with the Alien Force aliens, it's very nice that they were able to try all these different interpretations, but they made the right moves in the final. Although Brainstorm may be my first exception. While the final design still looks nice, it is essentially just a crab with a more human-like face on it, whereas these concept designs really take into the crustacean attributes and different ways the brain can be incorporated around the shell. I do think that they could have leaned more towards these concept designs a bit more, and Brainstorm would have been all the better for it.
A lot of Chromostone's designs were most likely made around the time his name was still Shard, as they had him without a face and he looked just like a giant rock. The first concept by Kennedy features 3 different designs that all have this shattered rock aesthetic, with one design having his torso and legs separated, the second having a giant rock in his chest with crystals protruding out of them, as well as his torso, and the third design having a crystal in the middle of his chest that has other crystals surrounding it. Both Kennedy's second design and Glenn Wong's design both look like his Alien Force design, just once again without his face, a design choice that I really wouldn't have minded if they decided to go through with it. The last concept design by Kennedy though is exactly what Chromostone went on to look like. He was even able to capture the goat's aura, giving him some very heroic poses. For Jet Ray, his concept design had him with more Manta Ray-like features, with a wider body and wings, along with having less of a humanoid face compared to his final design. His concept also gave him extra patterns on his chest, and one design even separated his torso and legs. There's also a high % chance that Jet Ray was originally going to be blue instead of red, as in the Hero Generation Bible, he's referred to as Blue Streak, making it safe to assume that his design also went through a color switch. Looking at Goop, Kennedy did a lot of interesting things with his design. His first design for Goop is an all-around mess, with the Goop not being all connected and having it stretch out in certain places. The second design has him with a different looking gravity projector, along with a wider body and rocks taking place for his eyes. His third design is once again all over the place, with more than one gravity projector to hold him up, and also having no lower body. But as awkward as it looks, I really love this design. The fourth design is basically official Goop, but with the fact that he has a bunch of holes in his body.
On the flip side, Humongosaur did have very drastic and diverse interpretations of his design, ranging outside of his typical dinosaur motifs and experimenting with different lizard-like shapes, probably as a homage to Godzilla and other kaiju monsters. While his final design still isn't anything special, looking at these concepts, I do think the dinosaur motif was the right way to go.
The D and Aliens all have some very, and I mean very different designs than their final designs. Starting off with the first 3 looks that all have various types of aliens, some that are a bit reminiscent of the background aliens in the classic series, and what seems to be armor. The other 2 designs ditch the armor looks and instead has them with these layers of skin and changing the look and function of the tentacles. This look also features a bigger D and alien with more loose skin and one with his torso bent back. In this case, I think the final designs were for the best.
But when looking at the hybrid, similar to Brainstorm, I am kind of a fan of the concept designs a little bit more. I love the hybrid's final design, but this really plays into the creepy alien-like appearance of him.
Tom Perkins made a concept design for Magister Labrid, the plumber who comes looking for Ben in the first episode. His design here makes him a lot more lanky and taller, having him also wear early versions of the UAF plumber suits. Now, Kennedy also made tons of random alien designs that are all like super freaky and overall just monster looking. These designs look like those Lovecraftian monsters with just some small alien touches. It's hard to tell exactly what any of these would do besides fly or just be super strong, but they're interesting to look at as something that's attached to Ben 10. One thing you'll notice is that 3 of these alien designs are drawn with the Omnitrix symbol, while almost no other concept designs included. It's also put on the most normal looking of these miscellaneous designs. These designs are probably what sparked the network to call for them to overhaul the look of Ben's aliens, as these might have been too much to air on Cartoon Network.
Ben's aliens being more humanoid to not only fit better as toys, but also be more marketable to the general audiences do kind of make sense. But with the wider cast of characters and aliens throughout the Ben 10 universe, I think they could have pushed it a bit more to the extremes like they did in Classic, and the hybrid concept art is the perfect example of that.
The aliens were not the only ones to undergo changes to the designs, as the main trio had their fair share of changes too. Ben went through the most change out of the trio. Started with a red jacket and boots to then having sneakers instead. I'm glad they ended up swapping his color palette from red and black to green and black, as the red looks a bit off to me, but I'm glad they were able to loosely incorporate this design into the show with the likes of Albedo. The Omnitrix, similar to Ben, looked pretty different in concept, as in the concept material, the Omnitrix just looks like a wristband with a light bulb inside of it, while in some simple sketches, it's drawn like the OG Omnitrix. The recalibrated Omnitrix underwent small changes too, as in concept it still has the slimmer typical wristwatch look, just with various different face plates and strap designs, as well as different button placements too. Now looking at Gwen, her design from concept to show is virtually unchanged. The biggest point of change comes with her facial features and head and being less squished, you could say. No offense, Gwen. Her outfit was initially going to be a white top and a black skirt before switching it to her blue and black outfit. Kevin's design is exactly the same compared to his final look, just with some tweaks to his face and giving him a slimmer body type. In some very early sketches though, you can see Kevin sporting a leather jacket. The main thing you'll notice when looking at a lot of Ben 10's concept art is how it feels more in line with Murakami's work on Teen Titans. When you put Ben 10's concept art next to Murakami's work on Teen Titans, they look almost identical. Teen Titans has one of my favorite art styles in animation. Not only is it fun to look at with their sharp lining, the character proportions, and the bright colors, it also allows the show to thrive visually. Teen Titans of course has a heavy anime influence, as the show balances both of those things perfectly, never hindering the serious moments of the show. If anything, the art style would enhance it. Now don't get me wrong, UAF's more Bruce Timm / DCAU art style looks good, and it ended up complementing what the show had eventually turned into. But seeing the concept art for the characters and aliens while also knowing how this art style translates into animation just by watching Teen Titans and similar shows like it, this art style that they were seemingly going for could have helped this era of Ben 10 visually stand out more. And who knows, maybe going with this art style could have made the transition to Omniverse a bit smoother for some people. When looking behind the scenes of Alien Force's development, it's unfortunate that a lot of their ideas had to be toned down or just changed to fit the network's requirements. Luckily, the talented crew that they brought on, and Dwayne McDuffie, Glenn Murakami, and everyone else were still able to craft a pretty damn good show. Alien Force is such a good show, especially in its first 2 seasons. So while it would have been cool to see these drop concepts brought to life in the show, it's good to know that the quality of the show was never altered and until season 3 came around, but that's a topic for another day. But I hope you all enjoyed today's video. If you did, be sure to subscribe if you're new, hit that like button, of course, help this video hit the algorithm, and comment down below how you feel about the early development of Ben 10 Alien Force. Do you like some of the early designs that the aliens had? Do you wish we got them instead of some of the final ones? How do you feel about the show's intended tone? Would you have wanted it to keep that more creepy aesthetic? I also want to give a shout out to Kuro for joining me on this video. His link will be down below, especially if you want to get more insight on some of the behind the scenes stuff of Ben 10 Alien Force. He has a couple of videos going in depth on some of Dwayne McDuffie's old scripts, so be sure to check those out if you're interested.
Thanks for having me on the channel once again. Always a pleasure. If you want to hear more of my thoughts and opinions, you can check me out over on the Ink Tank YouTube channel or on our second channel, The Rust Bucket. And as always, keep it fizzy.
But till next time, it's been your boy Dan, Boy Wonder, signing out. Peace.